So today we are taking a deep dive into the world of aftermarket headlight bulbs. Are these aftermarket LEDs that are out on the market really any better than a stock halogen bulb in your OEM headlight assembly? That's hopefully what we're going to try and find out here. And to give you guys all this information, I went out and I bought a legit headlight test machine. So this will measure the overall output of each headlight. It will show you the overall wattage that it consumes. And you can also, do things like adjust the amount of voltage going into the light itself. There's a ton of different information that we can get out of this machine. But it's one thing to sit there and test all these light bulbs in a standardized machine like this. But the issue with a machine like this is it doesn't tell you the overall beam pattern and how well that beam actually goes out onto the road, because you can get a really favorable result out of this machine that when you actually put it in a headlight and actually shoot it out onto the roadway, the light is so diffused and so all over the place that it doesn't do you any good, and it's simply blinding other drivers. We're going to try to answer the question, is there really any benefit to putting a set of these LED headlight bulbs in your vehicle? And ultimately, which ones should you buy? All right, so let me take you guys through kind of what I bought here and what we're going to be testing in this video. So starting out here in the middle, these are going to be a set of standard Wagner halogen replacement bulbs. So the low beam is an H11, the high beam is a 9005. Both of these applications that we're going to deal with in this video are taking the exact same bulb. So in addition to the brand new bulbs, I also have a used set of H11s and 9005s. So we'll be able to see how used bulbs compare to brand new ones that are halogens. But as far as the LEDs that we're going to be testing here. So down here on the far left, I've got two different tiers of light from C-Light. And if I pull these out and just look at them, you can see they're pretty drastically different than what you're going to get in a halogen. So in the middle there is going to be your LED chips. They have a large heat sink with no fan, and they have an external driver for the LEDs. Moving to this higher tier from C-Light, everything is essentially built into the bulb. So what you can run into with some of these bulbs that we'll take a look at in this video is some of these bulbs are physically so large with that heat sink and external driver that you can't fit them in the standard spot where the standard bulb is designed to go. So this bulb would take care of that. So you can see there's a little fan in the back of that, and overall the footprint of this bulb is largely exactly the same as what you're going to get with a standard halogen. The next one we have here is going to be from Akari, and again, has a fan on the bottom of it, LED chips on either side, and the driver is built in to the LED itself. Now these next one here I bought because they were super unique. These are the only ones that I found that were like this, and you can see they have 4 LED chips in the middle there, and we're going to have to see how this design overall compares with a lot of the other ones here. What you need to understand about these LED lights is really what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic the overall placement of that filament. So you see the filament in that light bulb? Well, all of these LEDs need to have the LED in the exact same spot as where that filament is in that headlight housing. Because the way that headlight housing is designed, that headlight housing is designed with that halogen in mind. So what you're trying to do is mimic the filament in a halogen bulb as best you can. So that was why I chose this one, because it appeared very, very similar to a standard halogen bulb. Moving over here to the other side, I got these from Sylvania, and again, they're pretty standard. You got a fan on the bottom of them. The driver is built into the bulb itself. But guys, these were the most expensive bulbs in this test. Each one of these, like the 9005s, those were $100. The H11s were another $100. So these are by far and away the most expensive ones in the test. These here, these are the most popular LED light bulbs that you can find on Amazon. They're made by that company, whatever that is, Fahrenheit. I think the set of 4, the 9005s and the H11s, I want to say was like $30, $35. And just like the high-end C lights that we're going to take a look at, everything is built into the bulb itself. You know, the driver's in there, the cooling is all built in there, and they're very, very compact. So you should be able to fit this bulb anywhere where you can fit, you know, a standard halogen. You're going to be able to put this LED replacement into. So we'll have to see how these perform. Now, moving down here on the end, I've got two different tiers of bulb from Auxbeam. So this tier here is their I believe it's F15. And if I pull this out here, you can see pretty standard with a lot of the other ones here. The driver is built into the bulb itself, has an external cooling fan and a fairly large heat sink. But when you compare it to the next tier up from Auxbeam, this is their F22, you can see these bulbs are quite a bit larger than anything else in the test. So this driver on the outside here, this black box, this is the driver for the LEDs, and a lot of the other ones here have this built into the LED bulb itself. By using an external driver, it should help manage some heat. So in theory, that should allow them to drive these LEDs a little bit harder and therefore create a little bit more output. And if you also notice on the bottom of these, this also has the largest heat sink out of anything in the test. So it'll be very interesting when we go put this thing in the standardized test machine to measure the overall lumen output, because strictly based on the construction and the size of the heat sink and the size of the driver, I'm willing to bet this is probably going to be, you know, one of the highest performing bulbs here as far as pure output. Now, as far as testing all of these bulbs, you know, naturally I have this bulb testing rig to do this, but I'm also testing each one of these bulbs for about 5 minutes. And the reason that I'm testing each bulb for such a long period of time is what I quickly found out with all of these LED light bulbs is the lumen output of all of these LEDs drops drastically over time. And the reason for that is some of these bulbs have poor heat sinks. So what happens is when you first turn the bulb on, you'll get, let's say, 3,000 lumens out of that bulb, which is very, very good. But if the bulb has a poor heat sink design and isn't able to pull the heat out of the LED chip, the overall output of that bulb will actually be cut in half after about 5 minutes. So let me bring you over here and show you this machine just to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. All right, so over here at the test machine, the setup is pretty basic as you would imagine. You take the bulb, put it in the fixture then reads the amount of lumens that the bulb is putting out. It also then calculates the amount of wattage that the bulb is consuming. And then because you have the lumens and the number of watts, it's also able to calculate number of lumens per watt. So hopefully that gives you guys plenty of information to go off of. I've got all this stuff written down for each one of the bulbs. As far as what's adjustable here, I can adjust the input voltage here. So I can turn this input voltage like way down. And you can see there, weirdly, like if I turn the input voltage down, the lumen output goes up. And I don't know if that's a heat thing or why that works that way, but look, I'm only putting 12.6 into that bulb. And if I crank it up, the output goes down again. So depending on how much voltage I'm putting into the bulb will also change the amount of lumen output of the bulb. So I'm going to give you guys a bunch of information in some charts coming up. But like I was saying a second ago, I ran each one of these bulbs in this fixture for about 5 minutes, and here is why. So this screen is plotting this information over time. So this blue line here is the amount of lumen output. So you can see the longer that this bulb was on, the lower the output became until it eventually flatlined. So I ran this bulb for about 7 or 8 minutes, and you can see the lumen output has now flatlined. But if you just take a reading when you initially turn that bulb on, you're gonna get a grossly inflated lumen output number. And this is probably how a lot of these companies are claiming such extravagant lumen outputs with some of these bulbs, because yes, it'll put out, let's say this bulb will put out 5,000 lumens. but it'll only put out 5,000 lumens for maybe a quarter of a second until it starts heating up, and then you can see just how drastically it drops off. I mean, the lumen output on this bulb is roughly half of what it was when I first turned it on. And the reason for that is, well, this bulb has a very poor heat sink design. So this bulb is just simply getting saturated with too much heat. It is not able to dissipate the heat correctly. So if I take this thermometer and I start reading this thing, you can see get this thing to focus there. You can see that bulb is about 133 degrees. So take another reading here. 132. So this bulb, the overall heat sink design on this bulb is really not very good. So what I just showed you guys is remarkably consistent throughout every LED here. It did not matter which LED bulb that I tested, they all started out at a much higher lumen output than what they ended at a 5-minute test. And it took about 2 minutes or so for each one of these bulbs to sort of like level out on that curve. And after about 2 minutes or so, they had all pretty much leveled off, and that's pretty much what they all ran at. Now there is one exception to that. That is going to be the Auxbeam F22. So the Auxbeam F22 is by far the largest physical bulb here. It has the largest heat sink, it has the largest driver, but it also has the highest amount of power output. It has the highest lumen output out of any bulb tested in this video. But what I found very, very interesting about that bulb is after 2 minutes, the wattage of the bulb would drop from 60 watts down to about 45 or 50. And it was remarkably consistent when it did this, and it did this across the H11 and the 9005 bulbs, both did this. I can't explain why any of this is going on, so if you guys have some information, please let me know down in the comments, because this is getting into the deep end of the electronics pool a little bit, and that's a little bit beyond my, my knowledge. So if you guys could fill me in, I would appreciate it. But I can tell you with certainty that the lumen output does drop slightly after 2 minutes, and it pretty much follows the wattage drop after 2 minutes. Why they're doing this, maybe it's some sort of thermal management strategy in that driver, I don't know. But regardless, it did do it. So this first chart that I'm showing you is the overall lumen output of each one of the bulbs that are in this video. So when you're looking at the 2 green bars, that is going to be at the start of the test. So when I first initially turn that bulb on, what is the lumen output of that bulb? And then the blue bars that you're seeing are that same bulb after 5 minutes. So you can see like the Akaris, they started out at 54 and 5500 lumens, but after the end of 5 minutes, they were about 3000 lumens. So you can see here just how inefficient some of these bulbs are as far as dissipating heat versus others. When you start looking at some of these lower output LEDs, the lower end Sea Light and the Sylvanias, well, the output at the start of the test versus the output at the end of the test is remarkably similar. So the way that this chart is actually sorted, it is sorted by the dark blue bars that you're seeing here. And that is the H11 low beam after a 5-minute runtime. Because I sorted it that way because that is going to be your most commonly used bulb, right? In a dark situation, it's very, very common to run your low beams for hours and hours and hours at a time. So that is why the chart is sorted the way that it is. One other thing I want to mention here is I tested used halogens and new halogens just to see if there was any real performance difference there, and by and large there really wasn't. But one thing that is worth noting is the 9005 high beam halogen bulb puts out about 1,000 more lumens than the H11. And the reason I bring that up is, well, when you start looking at the output of these LEDs, well, it really didn't matter if it was an H11 or a 9005, the lumen output was the same. So just something else to consider here when you guys are taking a look at all this information on this chart. Now on this chart, all of these bulbs are in the exact same order as what they were on the prior chart. So they're sorted by output here. And if you look, this is all of the kind of calculated information that I got off this test machine. So what you're seeing in green is the lumens per watt. And what you're seeing in blue is the total wattage of each bulb. So when you're taking a look at the LEDs, it's pretty apparent here that the further you go to the right on this chart, well, you can plainly see that the wattage of every one of these LEDs goes up, and that pretty much correlates with the overall lumen output of the bulbs. Now, naturally, when you look at the halogens are actually inverse of this. So the halogens draw around 70 watts, but they only put out between 20 and 30 lumens per watt of energy. So as you can see here, it should come as no shock, the LED bulbs are much more efficient at turning wattage into visible light. So now we're really going to start peeling back the layers of this onion, and your guys are going to be able to see there is a ton that actually goes into all of these lights and how they perform. So first thing we're going to do is let me show you the vehicle that we're going to be using for all of this testing. This is a 2017 Chevy Colorado, and it has a projector low beam and a reflector high beam. Now, the reason that I'm using this vehicle in particular is a projector headlight assembly is much more sensitive to the filament placement and the placement of the light source in the bulb than what a reflector housing is, just in general. Speaking in broad terms here, I'm sure there's exceptions to this rule depending on the bulb that you're using, but by and large, a projector housing is far more taxing or far more sensitive, I should say, to a set of poorly designed headlight bulbs. So naturally, this is the vehicle that I'm going to be using for this testing. So now as we get into some of this on-vehicle testing, what you're going to quickly find out is there are a lot of different layers to this onion that we're trying to digest here. So I'm going to do as best I can to try and break everything down for you guys in a way that makes it fairly easy to understand. But what you need to understand about light. Thus far in this video, we have taken a look at light output in lumens. Well, when we actually go and actually put these headlight bulbs in a car, we're going to measure it in a different unit. It's actually going to be called lux. And the difference between lumens and lux is lumens is how much light is generated by that light. It does not matter what direction that light goes in, just how much light is that light capable of generating. The thing is about lux, lux is the measurement of, okay, in this particular area, how much light do you have? And lux is going to be far more relevant to the performance of these headlights overall than what lumens is. Because if the light is, shooting out left and right and you're trying to look straight ahead, well, it really doesn't do you any good that that bulb has a high number of lumens. You want to know how much usable light is in front of you. So you're going to measure it in lux, because lux, again, is the measurement of light in a particular area. Now, the other layer of this onion that we kind of need to talk about is color temperature. So a lot of these bulbs here, like the halogens, they're going to be around 3600 Kelvin, 3500 Kelvin, and that is going to be like a yellowish amber light. Well, when you move to these LEDs, they're going to be 4500 to 6000 Kelvin, which is going to be a much whiter, almost blue-like light. And the reason I bring this up is your eyes can actually play with you. And what I'm saying is you can take a halogen bulb, put it in a housing. You can take an LED bulb with the exact same lux output, put it in a housing, put them side by side, and your eyes will tell you that the LED bulb is in fact brighter. The reason for that is the whiter light that comes out of that LED creates more contrast with the road and the objects around the road, tricking your eyes and your brain into thinking that light is in fact brighter because you're able to more clearly see the different colors of the items around you. But when you move to a lux meter and actually start measuring the two outputs with standardized equipment side by side, you will quickly find out that they are much more comparable than what your eyes are tricking you into believing. The other thing that you need to be aware of about your eyes in general and how they interact with your perceived level of brightness is your pupils. If you get a really, really bright set of headlights, your pupils dilate differently than what they do with a dim set of headlights. So that, again, can change your overall perceived output of each one of those headlights. So for example, like you could go from a halogen bulb to, the highest output bulb in this test, that aux beam F22, and looking at the overall lumen output, yes, the aux beam F22 is, let's say, 2.5 times brighter than the halogen, but it won't be perceived by your eyes that way because your pupils are dilated differently. So this is what I'm saying, like there are a lot of different layers to this onion. So I'm gonna do as best I can to try and break everything down for you guys and hopefully give you guys like as good of data as I can here. So the first thing we're gonna take a look at is the actual data that shows the amount of lux output at the different distances in this test. So I took lux readings at 3 different distances. I took one reading at 115 feet, I took another reading at 265 feet, and then I took the final reading at 765 feet away from the front of this truck. So with that, let me show you exactly how kind of this testing went and what was really involved in getting some of these numbers that I'm gonna share with you guys. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take you guys with me just to show you how I'm testing each one of these headlights. What I'm gonna show you, I'm doing for the high beam and the low beam for each bulb here, but I'm just gonna show you the high beams. I think these are like the Tech Whiz hubs, those weird looking ones that we saw earlier in the video. So just to give you an idea of what's going on, I'm trying to pull an all-nighter here to do this. Just after midnight, it is 3 degrees outside, that is Fahrenheit. It's just before Christmas, so it is rather cold outside. Let's go for a little walk. So getting out of the truck, the screen around here, I've got my lux meter here, and we're gonna go for a walk. So the first post here is this orange stake. Hopefully you guys can see it and it's not shaking too much as I'm walking. This is 115 feet. So when we get to 115 feet, we're gonna take a reading here. So right there, 115 feet. Is that 5.1, 5.2? Depending on where I hold this thing, there's 4.9. So you can see like it's pretty dependent on where I'm holding this thing. So I'm trying to move this thing around to get the highest reading possible. So at 115 feet with the high beams, we're at 5.5 lux. So now we're gonna keep walking. And I think the next stake out here is 265 feet. And you guys around, I would appreciate if you guys go down and hit that subscribe button, because it is rather cold out here. And this is kind of the ideal time to do this because, well, there's nobody out on the road. I'm on a dead-end street. I'm wearing high vis, so hopefully I don't get hit by a car, but I shouldn't. If you guys have any other suggestions as far as how to test any of this stuff, please let me know down in the comments, because it does in fact help the algorithm. We have now arrived at 265 feet. And I'm showing what, 1.2, 1.1? I'll bring this up a little bit. That's 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. There's 1.5, but I'm almost down to the pavement, like 1.6. So that's as high as I can get it at 265 feet. So now we're gonna walk all the way out here to the end, and this is 765 feet. So I did some looking at Car and Driver when they tested one of these Colorados when they were brand new. And this vehicle will stop from 70 miles an hour in something like 170 feet or so. So this is way beyond how far this vehicle would take to stop, even at 70. So there's no concern here about overdriving headlights. As you can see, you may be able to see there, I don't know how much the camera is actually adjusting, but I can in fact see my shadow. And we're still walking. Truck is still rather bright with the high beams on, but we're getting there. It wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't 3 degrees outside, but I'm here to say I've been outside now for about 3 hours at this point. And believe it or not, when it's 3 degrees Fahrenheit, you actually start to get used to it after a little bit. So, almost there. And the lux meter is showing nothing. You can see there is some semblance of something on that stop sign, but it's not enough to be picked up by the lux meter. So, lux meter at the stop sign, reading a whole lot of zip. So, yeah, you can see the actual shadow behind the lux meter, but the lux meter itself won't read anything. It's just simply not enough light this far out. So now, well, I gotta walk my happy butt all the way back to the truck, 765 feet. Go get another set of bulbs put in the truck and do this whole thing over again. So the results you're seeing on the screen are the results from my all-nighter. So looking up at the chart on the top, that is going to be the low beam output, and the bottom is going to be the high beam output. So when you really start breaking these two charts down, looking at the top chart in gray, that is the low beam result at 115 feet. The red results are the low beams at 265 feet. So you can see on this top chart, you know, the only thing that was actually able to register any sort of lux output at 265 feet were the stock halogens, the aux beam F15s, and the F22s. But what's interesting about this is look at the halogens at 0.3, and the aux beam F22s are 1. So that means the aux beam F22s have 3 times the amount of output on the low beam at 265 feet is what the stock halogens do. So this is why, like, we'll get into it a little bit later, but there's no way that I would recommend a set of aux beam F22s on a low beam bulb, because you're going to start blinding people. And this is the information that is really telling here. You have 3 times the amount of power at 265 feet is what you do with a set of stock halogens. So when you move down to the bottom chart, this is, again, going to be the high beams. So the only bulbs that were actually able to register any sort of output at that stop sign were the high-end C lights, the Akaris, the F15 aux beams, and the F22s. But I think one of the things that's really, really interesting about this bottom chart and even the top chart is going to be the Tech Whiz hubs. Those bulbs with the really strange design, those had a higher lumen output than a stock halogen. But the issue is, when you look at their actual functional output onto a roadway, they are worse than a set of stock halogens. Well, the reason for that is the light coming out of the housing is being diffused so badly that what is being shown out onto the roadway is worse than the stock bulb. So this is why light diffusion and how the light comes out of the housing matters, because yeah, you could have a bulb that puts out 1 million lumens, but if it puts 1 million lumens over into the ditch, it really doesn't matter how bright you're lighting up a ditch. You need to know how much functional light is in front of you, and that is what these two charts are actually showing you. So the next thing we're going to take a look at here is the overall beam patterns of each one of these lights in this test. So to do this, when I installed those lights into the housing, I simply backed my truck out of the garage. about 10 feet or so away from the garage door, and I shine the lights on the garage door so then you guys can plainly see, you know, how defined is that cutoff on the low beam? Is there any hot spots? Is there any cold spots? And really, are you going to blind other drivers by using any of these things? So let's get into that now. So what you guys are taking a look at here on the screen is the stock low beam halogen bulb in this truck. And what I'll do now is I will add in the stock high beam bulb up top here. So what we were taking a look at is this is the standard that all of these LED bulbs should try to match, because this is what all of these headlights are really designed around, are these halogen bulbs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start cycling through each one of the bulbs in this test, and I have them in order of lumen output. So as far as their lumen output in the test machine, that is the order that we're going to take a look at here. I have each bulb cycling across the screen at about a 5-second interval. And if there's anything you want to see for a longer period of time, well, just pause the video and take a look at it. So as far as what you're taking a look at here, there's a couple outliers. So the C-Light Xeno Powers, the low-end C-Light bulbs, you can kind of see with those, there are some pretty big cold spots and some pretty big hot spots that are very different than what the stock bulbs are. The other one that's a big outlier here is going to be the Tech Whiz Hubs. Again, with those, there's a bunch of white light or a bunch of hot light down at the lower end of that beam pattern, which is really strange. And we'll take a look at that a little bit more in depth here in a second. But as I'm cycling through all of these pictures, just be aware that the shutter speed and the aperture for every one of these photos is exactly the same. So you can also sort of make brightness comparisons because the settings on the camera for the top photo and the bottom photo are exactly the same here. So hopefully this, guys, gives you some sort of idea of where the hot spots are and where they aren't and what's, you know, comparable and what isn't. Now, just to show you guys how bad those Tech Whiz Hub bulbs really are, check out this picture. So this was taken in my front yard, and this is just shining the lights out across my front yard that is covered in snow. And look at the number of hot spots and the number of cold spots that you see with these bulbs. And what's crazy is when you flip over and you look at the stock halogens, look how even it is compared to what it is with these Tech Whiz Hub bulbs. So this is why the overall design of an LED bulb matters big time. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the information that I showed you in the lux output and combine that information with the beam pattern. And now what we're going to go over is, well, ultimately, how well do all of these lights actually light up the road in front of you? So let's take a look. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cycle through every one of the bulbs here at my test location. So with the camera sitting essentially right on top of my gauge cluster on my truck, on top of the dashboard, I took a picture with every one of the bulbs here. And one thing you need to note about these pictures you're about to see, every picture here has the exact same settings on the camera, just like I did with the beam patterns on the garage door. So one thing you need to understand about some of the marketing materials related to these bulbs is you can heavily manipulate the overall perceived output of a light bulb in marketing materials strictly based on the settings on the camera. And just to show you guys, this bulb that you're seeing on the screen is a stock halogen. This bulb on the screen is also the stock halogen. The difference is the settings on the camera. So I have locked the aperture, locked the shutter speed, and now we're going to cycle through and take a look at each one of these bulbs in this test. So the way this is going, it's going the exact same way as the beam patterns that I just showed you. It is in order of lumen output in the test machine with the exact same settings on the same road at the same distance. And one thing I want to bring to your attention as I'm cycling through here is the truck is in the exact same spot. The truck may be, turned slightly left or right depending on how I parked it, but the distance away from the pins that you're seeing in the roadway, like that first set of pins there, I will mark. That is my 115-foot marker on every one of these lights. So now you have a distance point of reference for every one of these bulbs that's cycling across the screen. Now, as far as overall performance here, I want to say, because of the poor beam pattern with the Tech Whiz Hubs, those, in my opinion, are worse than stock. The
overall lux output readings sort of go along with this. And the only difference that, in my opinion, that you're seeing in the perceived output of those bulbs is the higher color temperature. So like I told you guys when we were talking about differences in the way your eye perceives light, that higher color temperature is going to offer more contrast with the objects around the road. So as I'm cycling through here and we're getting closer and closer to those aux beam F22s, you can plainly see that, these lights are in fact getting much, much brighter. But the thing you need to understand is when you get to the aux beam F22 low beam, those lights are simply putting out so many lumens total that it really doesn't matter what housing you put them in. You're going to have far more light going into the ditch on either side of the road than what you will with a set of stock halogens. Because think about it. You've increased the lumen output of the bulb 3 times almost over stock. Well, if with the stock bulbs you have, let's say, 10 lumens illuminating the ditch, well, now suddenly you have 30 lumens illuminating the ditch. So this is where like F22 low beams have no use on the street, in my opinion. You're just going to blind other people, especially if they're in low riding cars that are going to be more in your sight line and more in your beam pattern than a high riding truck. So guys, overall, hopefully, as this is cycling through, you can see exactly what you want to see. And you can pause it and look at any of these beams as long as you want to.
So now at the end of all of this different testing, what should you actually go out and spend your money on? So let me pick up the camera and just bring you guys over to the bench, because honestly, there's really only 2 options that I would recommend out of everything on this bench. So starting out down here on the far, far left-hand side of the bench, well, we're gonna start out down here with these that I would in no way, shape, or form recommend any of you guys buying for any reason whatsoever. So these are going to be the C-Light, Zenopower, the TechWiz hubs, the Sylvanias, and the halogens. So starting down here on the far left with the lower end C-Light bulbs. What you have to understand is just because a manufacturer has a decent bulb doesn't mean the same manufacturer can make some crappy bulbs. And the most perfect example I can give you of this is C-Light. So these lower end C-Light bulbs, the issue is with them, the beam pattern really isn't all that great because the bulbs are so thick. You see the distance there in the middle between the 2 chips on this side and on this side? Well, that throws off the beam pattern. And the issue is with that, well, that's going to throw some glare. The other issue with these bulbs is these bulbs do not produce as many lumens as a standard halogen bulb. So you're buying a bulb with lower output than stock, with a worse beam pattern than stock, and calling it an upgrade. Again, no way that I would ever recommend those bulbs from C-Light. Now, the TechWiz hubs, this is like a textbook example of lumens not translating into performance. So I believe these had a higher lumen output on the low beam and the high beam than the stock halogen bulbs. But because of their wacky design with the LED chips attempting to mimic a stock halogen filament, well, the beam pattern on these bulbs was worse than stock. This had the worst beam pattern out of anything sitting here on the bench by a wide margin. And the issue is with that, well, when you actually put them in a headlight housing and measure the lux output on the Roadway, well, this was one of the lowest performing bulbs in this test. And it all comes down to the wacky design of the chips and the chip placement. So for that reason, no way that I would ever recommend those bulbs. Moving on to Sylvania. Now, honestly, the Sylvania bulbs really aren't that bad, but the issue is with the Sylvania bulbs for me is their price. The lumen output of these bulbs overall was about the same as stock on the low beams, and I believe the high beam was worse than stock as far as lumen output. And when you actually put them in a set of housings and shine them out onto the roadway, they appear whiter than stock, but they really don't light up the roadway any better. And my main issue with the Sylvania bulbs is the price. 2 Sylvania bulbs currently is $100. So to do a low beam, high beam upgrade on a vehicle that has a dedicated low beam and high beam bulb, you're talking about a $200 lighting upgrade for a set of Sylvanias. And the issue is they perform out on the roadway like a $30 set of bulbs. So for that reason alone, I'm just gonna skip them. The halogens, these bulbs, I believe, had the lowest lumen output out of any LED in the test. And the reason for that is the design of the heat sink, or the lack thereof, caused these bulbs to saturate with heat. And if you guys know anything about electronics, electronics do not like heat. And because of that, well, the lumen output drops considerably after about 5 minutes or so. So yes, they are cheap, but they are cheap for a reason. These are, I believe, functionally, as far as the amount of lux output onto the roadway, worse than stock. So keep your halogen bulbs if you're thinking about buying a set of these. Now these next one here, I'm not saying I'm recommending them, but they're not bad. So these from C-Light, this is their higher tier. This is their Cenopark, whatever the heck they want to call it. So these bulbs have a very, very small footprint. So you can fit this bulb anywhere where you can fit a stock halogen. They do have a fan in an attempt to manage some heat, but again, because these bulbs have such high output versus a stock halogen bulb, and the heat sink is very, very small, I really question how long these bulbs will last, because when you're looking at some of these heat sinks and you're comparing them side by side, you can plainly see like these are really, really small and they're gonna get really, really hot if you try to run this bulb as bright as that bulb. So they're not bad. Just be aware that, you know, they may have a short lifespan. The next one's here from Akari. The Akaris actually performed really well. My main issue with the Akaris is their price. They're simply a little bit more expensive than the aux beams that we're going to talk about here in a second, and the performance is the same. So these are the Akari wings, and yeah, they're not bad bulbs. They have a decent footprint, decent heat sink design with a fan, and I'm willing to bet like 99.9% of the vehicles out there, you could put this bulb into and it will work without any issue. Now, as far as the 2 that I recommend, it's going to be the 2 from aux beam in this test. So the F15 and the F22. The F22 is by far and away the brightest bulb here, without question. It is the most powerful bulb here, and this bulb is, in my opinion, if you put this bulb in a low beam, it is borderline dangerous, because if you get a low vehicle that gets into the path of these lights, you will blind the other driver. It's not because the beam pattern is screwed up, it's just these bulbs are so friggin' bright that it is obnoxious to use these on a low beam. The other issue that I have with these particular lights is their size. So if you're looking at these, naturally, you know, when you have an LED chip that creates that amount of light, it's gonna get really, really hot. Well, because it gets really, really hot, it has a large heat sink, and the driver for the LED is in that box rather than built into the bulb like a lot of the other ones here. And they do all this, again, to try and manage heat. Well, the issue is with this, on my truck uses these dust caps that go on the back of the headlights. So when you put the bulb into the housing, you cover the bulb with this dust cover. I can't use the F22s in my truck because I can't install the dust cover. The heat sink and the driver on these F22s is simply so big that there is no way that I can put these bulbs in the housing and install the dust cover. So my recommendation on these bulbs from aux beam, the F22s, use them in a high beam and they will be absolutely fantastic. You may not actually get them to fit in your particular application depending on what you're dealing with in the vehicle, but they are really, really good bulbs if they will fit in the application that you're looking at. So my best recommendation here, guys, is going to be the aux beam F15s because they have a much smaller footprint. They're giving you about 90% of the light output of these, and you can see just how drastic the size difference is with this bulb versus, you know, that giant F22. When you put the two side by side here, it's painfully apparent, you know, just how massive and how big these F22s are, but they do have a lot of output. So hopefully, guys, all of that information gives you enough knowledge that you can go out and, you know, possibly look at upgrading your LED lights in your vehicle and not blind everybody else on the roadway. So guys, I will have links in the description to the different aux beam lights and the other bulbs that I tested here if you guys are interested in any of this stuff. As always, guys, if you guys liked the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.